On my wedding night, I walked into the bridal suite expecting champagne and romance. Instead, I caught my new father-in-law brutally assaulting my mother-in-law. When I rushed to save her, my wealthy husband did not protect me. He slapped me across the face and told me to learn my place. He thought because he elevated me from a modest background, I would just cower and submit. He was entirely wrong. I broke four of his fingers, grabbed his bleeding mother, and hijacked his luxury vehicle. The next morning, I made his corrupt family empire pay. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe abusers always get the justice they deserve. My name is Stella and I am 31 years old. I work as a forensic accountant, a crucial detail my arrogant husband Bradley thought was just a boring desk job. We had just finished our lavish wedding reception at a five-star hotel in downtown Manhattan. The champagne was flowing, the string quartet was playing, and everyone thought we were the perfect high society couple. I left the grand ballroom early to change out of my heavy wedding gown. As I pushed open the solid mahogany doors of the private bridal suite, a sharp, sickening crack echoed through the room. Richard, my powerful and supposedly respectable father-in-law, stood menacingly over his wife Beatrice. She was crumpled on the thick Persian carpet, desperately clutching her bleeding lip, while tears streamed down her pale face. He raised his heavy hand, fully intending to strike her again. I did not pause to think. I dropped my beaded clutch and lunged forward, shoving Richard violently away from her. I stood firmly between them, my white silk dress rustling around my legs, physically shielding a woman who had always been nothing but kind to me. Richard glared at me, his face burning with absolute rage, adjusting his expensive tuxedo jacket as if he had merely tripped over a rug. At that precise moment, the suite door swung open again and Bradley walked in. My handsome, charismatic new husband. The man who had promised to love and protect me just 3 hours ago at the altar took in the scene. I fully expected him to rush to his mother and scream at his father for this horrific abuse. Instead, he calmly locked the door behind him and walked slowly toward me, his eyes completely devoid of warmth. Before I could utter a single word, Bradley raised his hand and slapped me hard across the cheek. The sheer force of the impact sent me stumbling backward into the heavy wooden vanity table. My face burned with intense pain, but the emotional shock hurt far worse. Bradley stepped closer, pointing a threatening finger directly at my face. "Do not ever interfere in our family business, Stella," he growled. "This is exactly how the men in this family teach their wives respect. You are just a lowly, basic accountant I picked up from a cramped apartment in a rundown neighborhood. You should be down on your knees grateful that I gave you the prestigious title of my wife. Keep your mouth shut, look pretty for the cameras, and enjoy the billionaire lifestyle I provided. Otherwise, I will throw you right back into the pathetic gutter where I found you." He reached out aggressively to grab my bare shoulder, perhaps expecting me to fall to the floor and cry like a broken victim. He severely underestimated the girl from the cramped apartment. As his heavy hand clamped down on my collarbone, my survival instincts kicked in. I grabbed his wrist with both hands. I pivoted my weight rapidly, locked his hand in a brutal joint hold I had mastered during my college self-defense classes, and snapped his hand violently backward. The sickening crunch of 4 fingers breaking echoed loudly in the silent room. Bradley let out an agonizing, high-pitched scream, immediately dropping to his knees on the carpet and clutching his mangled hand against his chest. Richard stood completely frozen in pure shock, unable to comprehend that a woman had just laid out his golden boy. "Get up, Beatrice," I commanded, grabbing my mother-in-law by her uninjured arm. "We are leaving this place right now." She scrambled to her feet, her eyes wide with absolute terror, but she followed me without hesitation. We ran down the private staff corridor, completely avoiding the main reception area, where hundreds of wealthy guests were still drinking expensive champagne, paid for by the monsters we were fleeing. We burst out of the service exit into the cool, dark night air. The valet had parked Bradley's massive black SUV near the side entrance for our planned getaway. I tossed the stunned valet $100 bill, grabbed the keys from his hand, and shoved Beatrice into the passenger seat before jumping quickly behind the wheel. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, tearing out of the hotel parking lot and aggressively merging onto the busy highway. The bright city lights blurred past the windows as I navigated frantically toward the nearest emergency room. Beatrice was trembling violently in the passenger seat, pressing a tissue to her bleeding face. I glanced at her, my own heart pounding furiously against my ribs. "We are going to the police right after the hospital," I told her firmly, gripping the wheel tight. "They will lock them up for this tonight." Beatrice grabbed my arm with desperate strength, her nails digging into my skin. Her eyes were wide, filled with a primal fear that made my blood run cold. "No, Stella, you do not understand," she gasped, coughing as tears streamed down her face. "If we go to the police, Richard will kill us both. He owns the judges, he owns the precinct, and he will not stop until we are dead." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white as I navigated the treacherous city traffic. Beatrice was shaking uncontrollably in the passenger seat, her designer evening gown stained with her own blood. I refused to let her fear dictate my actions. I slammed on the brakes as we reached the illuminated emergency room entrance of the city hospital. I threw the car into park, ignoring the shouting security guard, and rushed to the passenger side to help my mother-in-law out of the vehicle. The bright fluorescent lights of the emergency room were blinding. I dragged Beatrice through the sliding glass doors, demanding immediate medical attention. The triage nurses took one look at her bruised face and trembling frame and immediately brought a wheelchair. They whisked her through a set of double doors, leaving me standing in the chaotic waiting room, my white wedding dress drawing stares from everyone around me. I marched to the registration desk, slamming my pristine credit card down to cover whatever costs were required to keep her safe and isolated. For 20 agonizing minutes, I paced the sterile hallway. I calculated my next moves mentally, reviewing the assets Bradley and I shared, evaluating the exact legal standing of my situation. I was a forensic accountant. I knew how to follow paper trails and dissect financial leverage. But nothing could have prepared me for the physical threat currently hunting us. The heavy emergency room doors suddenly burst open. The loud crash made several waiting patients jump in their seats. Richard marched into the lobby, his face a mask of calculated fury. Right behind him was Bradley. My new husband cradled his right arm against his chest, his hand wrapped in a thick, rigid medical splint provided by whatever private concierge doctor they had undoubtedly woken up in the middle of the night. Flanking them was a tall, sharply dressed man clutching a leather briefcase. It was clear this man was their high-powered corporate attorney brought in to clean up their violent mess. Bradley spotted me immediately. His eyes burned with a venomous hatred that made my blood run cold, but I stood my ground. He stormed across the waiting room, his expensive shoes echoing sharply on the linoleum floor. He stopped mere inches from my face, his uninjured hand pointing an accusing finger at my chest. "You have made the biggest mistake of your pathetic life," Stella Bradley hissed, his voice echoing in the quiet lobby. "You really thought you could break my bones, steal my vehicle, and just hide in a public hospital. You are completely delusional." I did not flinch. I stared directly into his furious eyes, crossing my arms over my ruined wedding gown. "I stopped a monster from beating his wife to death," I replied, my voice dangerously calm and unwavering. "If you want to explain to the police exactly how those fingers snapped while you were defending an abuser, I strongly suggest you call them right now." The slick attorney stepped forward, flashing a cold, predatory smile. He adjusted his silk tie and looked at me as if I were a minor inconvenience on his daily agenda. "There will be no police involvement tonight," Mrs. Bradley, the lawyer, stated smoothly. "My client is offering you a highly generous choice. You will step aside and allow Mr. Richard to retrieve his wife. In exchange, my client will not press felony assault charges against you for the malicious attack that shattered his hand." Bradley leaned in closer, his breath hot against my cheek. "I am activating the prenup tomorrow morning," he growled. "You are getting absolutely nothing. I will drag you through civil court, bankrupt whatever miserable savings you have, and send you straight to prison for aggravated assault. You will leave this marriage with a criminal record and $0 to your name. Now tell me where my mother is." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Do you honestly think threats about money and fake assault charges are going to make me hand a battered woman back to her abuser? Go ahead and activate the prenup, Bradley. Call your judges, call your police. I am not moving a single inch until she is safely transferred to a domestic violence unit." Richard finally stepped forward, pushing his son aside. He looked completely unbothered, exuding the dark confidence of a man who had never faced a single consequence in his 60 years of life. He did not yell. He did not threaten me directly. He simply turned his attention to a man in a crisp white coat hurrying down the hallway toward us. The man wore a badge identifying him as the hospital chief administrator. He was sweating profusely, dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief as he approached Richard with an eager, submissive posture. Mr. Richard, the administrator, panted, bowing his head slightly. I apologize for the commotion. I was just informed that you were in the building. How can we assist you tonight? My wife had a severe mental breakdown this evening, Richard lied effortlessly, his voice dripping with fake sorrow. She injured herself during a manic episode. My disturbed daughter-in-law here kidnapped her from our private event. I need my wife discharged into my custody immediately so I can transport her to our private psychiatric facility. That is a complete lie, I shouted, stepping between Richard and the administrator. He beat her. She has defensive wounds and severe facial contusions. She needs a police report, not a psychiatric evaluation. The hospital administrator completely ignored me. He looked only at Richard. I understand completely, Mr. Richard. We highly value your family financial contributions to this massive medical center. I will prepare the official discharge paperwork right away. You absolutely cannot do that, I shouted. He quickly gestured to 3 approaching hospital security guards. Escort this crazy woman out immediately. Richard smirked wickedly, walking directly toward the emergency bay where Beatrice lay terrified and helpless. The 3 security guards lunged toward me, their hands outstretched to drag me into the cold night. I did not step back. I pulled my smartphone from my ruined wedding dress and held it high. I pressed a button on my screen, instantly initiating a secure live video feed directly to my private cloud server. Do not touch me, I ordered, my voice cutting through the emergency room. The guards hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. I turned my camera directly toward the sweating hospital administrator. If those guards lay one finger on me, I will forward this live recording to the State Medical Board. You are violating the Violence Against Women Act and HIPAA protocols by releasing a battered patient to her abuser. I am recording your face, your name badge, and your complicity in this crime. You will lose your license before sunrise. The administrator stopped dead in his tracks. The color drained from his face as he stared at the recording light on my phone. Richard paused at the edge of the emergency bay, turning slowly to face me. His smirk vanished, replaced by a dark, murderous glare. He gestured for his attorney to handle the situation. The lawyer smoothed his tie and took a step forward, wearing a condescending smile. You are making empty threats, little girl, the lawyer sneered. You have absolutely no leverage here. Put the phone away and walk out the door before we ruin your life. I shifted my phone to capture the lawyer, then aimed it at Richard. I am a forensic accountant, I stated clearly, so every nurse and patient could hear me. I know how your luxury car dealerships operate, Richard. I know about your upcoming initial public offering next quarter. I have the lead investigative reporter for the city's largest news station on speed dial. I want you to imagine the morning headlines. Auto kingpin bribes hospital officials to kidnap his brutally beaten wife on his son's wedding night. How fast will your investors pull their millions when that story hits the front page? Bradley groaned in agony, clutching his hand against his chest. Dad, do not listen to her, he gasped, his face pale. She is just a nobody. She is bluffing. I am not bluffing, I said, maintaining a deadly calm tone. I tapped my phone screen, reading aloud the contact name of a prominent local journalist. I will press send in exactly 3 seconds. 1, 2. Wait! The hospital administrator shouted, throwing his hands up in surrender. He frantically waved the guards away. Stand down! Everyone stand down right now! He turned to Richard, his voice trembling with absolute panic. Mr. Richard, I am sorry, but I cannot authorize this discharge. It is a massive liability. The patient presents with obvious defensive injuries. Protocol requires an automatic domestic violence hold. My hands are tied. Richard stepped toward the administrator, his fists clenched tight. You spineless coward, Richard hissed. You know exactly who funds this entire cardiac wing. I do not care about your donations, the administrator squeaked, backing away. The law is the law. We are transferring her to the secure ward immediately. No unauthorized visitors will be permitted. Not even you. Nurses swarmed into Beatrice Bay, pulling the curtains shut and preparing her for emergency transport. I let out a slow breath, keeping my phone raised. I had won the first battle. Richard turned his venomous gaze back to me. His eyes were cold, calculating, and filled with absolute destruction. "You think you are clever, Stella," he growled, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You are completely out of your depth. You just signed your own death warrant." He pivoted sharply and marched toward the exit. Bradley stumbled after him, shooting me one last look of hatred before the doors closed. The slick corporate attorney simply shook his head and quietly followed his wealthy clients out into the darkness. I lowered my phone, my body shaking with raw adrenaline. The adrenaline rush that had kept me standing suddenly evaporated, leaving behind profound physical exhaustion. I spent 2 grueling hours filling out protective order paperwork and speaking with hospital social workers. I detailed the horrific abuse I had just witnessed. I sat silently by Beatrice's bed in the locked ward until the intravenous sedatives finally pulled her into a deep, dreamless sleep. Her bruised face looked so frail against the white hospital pillows, but she was completely secure. For now, she was entirely safe from their violent wrath. I walked out of the sterile hospital lobby shortly before dawn. The cold city air hit my face, shocking my exhausted nervous system. I desperately needed a plan to survive the upcoming war. I needed my laptop, my encrypted hard drives containing years of financial research, and my government passport. All of my essential personal belongings were securely locked inside the massive marital mansion I shared with Bradley. I climbed back into Bradley's stolen SUV, gripping the steering wheel, and drove recklessly toward the affluent gated community where the elite hid their darkest secrets. The sun was just beginning to rise as I pulled onto the tree-lined street. I turned the corner and approached the iron gates of our estate. I hit the brakes, my eyes widening in pure disbelief. My belongings were not inside the house. They were scattered violently across the manicured front lawn. My expensive work suits, my shoes, my personal documents, and pieces of my shattered wedding bouquet lay discarded in the morning dew like trash. Standing confidently amidst the wreckage of my carefully built life was Jasmine, my arrogant sister-in-law. She wore expensive designer athletic wear, holding a steaming cup of coffee in one hand and a heavy black trash bag in the other. She smirked wickedly as I stepped out of the stolen vehicle, waiting to deliver her next crushing blow. I slammed the heavy car door shut and marched across the damp grass. My ruined wedding dress dragged through the mud, but I kept my head held high. Jasmine took a slow sip from her ceramic coffee mug, looking me up and down with an expression of pure disgust. She kicked a pile of my tailored work blouses with her pristine white sneakers, scattering them further across the yard. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," Jasmine sneered, dropping the heavy trash bag onto my scattered shoes. "The great savior of the family. You really thought you could just waltz into our lives, play the hero, and disrespect my father without consequences. You are nothing but a pathetic gold digger. We always knew you were trash, and now you belong exactly where you started, right in the garbage." I stopped a few feet away from her, completely ignoring her childish insults. I carefully surveyed the damage. My professional documents were ruined by the morning dew. My expensive laptop was nowhere to be seen. I folded my arms, staring at her with cold indifference. "Where is my laptop, Jasmine?" I demanded, keeping my voice dangerously low. "You can throw away my clothes, but if you touched my work files, you are looking at federal corporate espionage charges." Jasmine threw her head back and laughed loudly. Her shrill voice echoed through the quiet, affluent neighborhood. "You do not get to make threats anymore, Stella. You are officially cut off. Bradley locked you out of everything. Every single bank account, every investment portfolio, and every credit card. You are completely broke. You cannot even afford a taxi ride back to the slums you crawled out of." Before I could formulate a response, the low rumble of a high-performance engine interrupted us. A sleek, silver sports car pulled up to the curb, parking directly behind the SUV I had stolen earlier. The driver door opened and Bradley stepped out. He looked exhausted, but his trademark arrogant smirk was firmly planted on his face. His right arm was still heavily bound in the thick medical splint. He leaned against the expensive vehicle, crossing his uninjured arm over his chest, waiting for me to break down and beg for mercy. "Good morning, darling," Bradley taunted, taking slow, deliberate steps onto the lawn. How was your night in the cheap public hospital? I hope you enjoyed playing the martyr because it cost you everything. I told you I would activate the prenup. My lawyers are already drafting the divorce papers. You get zero spousal support. You get zero alimony. You get nothing. He kicked one of my broken heels across the driveway. This whole marriage was a charity project. Bradley continued, his tone dripping with malice. My family only tolerated you because my father needed your accounting skills to clean up a few messy tax filings. We needed a naive, desperate girl with a forensic background to sign off on our books. We never actually wanted you in this family. You were just a useful idiot. Now that you have outlived your usefulness and attacked my father, you are entirely disposable. Jasmine moved to stand next to her brother, bumping her shoulder against his in a show of unified hostility. She needs to pay us back for the wedding, Bradley. Jasmine suggested wickedly. Maybe she can work as our maid. I looked back and forth between the two siblings. They looked so incredibly smug, so certain of their absolute victory. They truly believed their wealth and status made them untouchable gods. They expected me to fall to my knees on the wet grass, sobbing uncontrollably, pleading for them to take me back and restore my access to their luxurious lifestyle. Instead, I reached into the pocket of my ruined dress and pulled out my smartphone. I calmly unlocked the screen, ignoring their confused expressions. "Are you calling a cab?" Stella, Bradley mocked, taking another step forward. "Good luck finding a driver willing to pick up a crazy woman covered in dirt and blood. I am telling you right now, you are banned from stepping foot inside this house. The security codes have been changed. The locks are being replaced today." I did not look at him. I simply stared at my phone screen, tapping the keypad deliberately. "I am not calling a cab, Bradley," I stated softly. "I am calling the local police precinct." Jasmine scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically. "The police again. You really are a broken record. They will not help you here. This is our property. You have no legal standing." I raised the phone to my ear, waiting for the dispatcher to answer. I locked eyes with Bradley, allowing a genuine, terrifying smile to spread across my face. "That is where you are completely wrong, Bradley. You really should have read the fine print on those prenup documents your expensive lawyers forced me to sign." Bradley frowned, his arrogant smirk faltering for a fraction of a second. "What are you talking about?" The dispatcher answered the line. "Yes, hello," I spoke clearly and professionally into the receiver. "My name is Stella. I need to report a trespassing and vandalism incident at my private residence. Yes, the address is 400 Oakwood Drive." Bradley's face lost a significant amount of color. He took a hesitant step toward me. "Stella, put the phone down right now. You are making a massive mistake." I continued speaking to the dispatcher, making sure my voice carried across the lawn. "Yes, there are two hostile individuals on my front lawn. They have destroyed my personal property and are currently refusing to leave my premises. One of them is acting highly aggressive. I request immediate police assistance to have them removed from my land." Jasmine laughed nervously, glancing at her brother. "She is totally insane, Bradley. Tell her this is your house. We own this estate." I simply smiled at them both. This is going to be fun. I ended the call, slipping my phone into my ruined dress pocket. Jasmine sighed, stepping over my scattered clothing to point a manicured finger at me. "You are embarrassing yourself, Stella. Do you honestly think the police will arrest my brother at his own estate? They will arrest you for wasting their time." Bradley chuckled, adjusting his splint. "Let her stand here until the cops drag her away." He leaned against his sports car. "I want to see the look on your face when you realize you have nothing left. I canceled your platinum cards this morning, Stella. Every single one. You cannot even buy a cup of coffee right now." I took a slow breath. "It is fascinating how much blind arrogance runs in your bloodline, Bradley. You rely so heavily on your father's wealth that you never read the legal documents you sign. Did you ever wonder why your father insisted on putting this massive estate into a holding company? He wanted to shield assets from federal tax liabilities. He thought he was a genius, using his accountant daughter-in-law to hide his money." Bradley frowned. He crossed his uninjured arm over his chest. "What are you rambling about? The house is owned by a private Delaware trust. My father set it up to protect our assets from gold diggers exactly like you. The prenup clearly states that all properties held in private trusts remain with our family in the event of a divorce. You signed away your rights to this property months ago. I shook my head with a pitying smile. I did sign the prenup, Bradley. And you are correct about the clause regarding private trusts. Whatever assets are legally held by a corporate entity remain the sole property of the managing member. But you never verified who actually owns the Delaware company holding the deed to this house. You blindly trusted that your father had everything handled. Jasmine scoffed, gripping her coffee mug tightly. My father owns it, you idiot. He owns everything. He owns the car dealerships, I corrected sharply. But he does not own Vanguard Horizon Holdings, the company holding the deed to 400 Oakwood Drive. When your father demanded I structure the shell company to hide this property from the Internal Revenue Service, he needed a clean name to act as the managing member. He told me to put it in my name temporarily until the audit blew over. What he did not realize was that I drafted the operating agreement to grant myself absolute ownership. This is my house and I am officially evicting you. Bradley's face turned ash gray. He pushed off his sports car, eyes wide with sudden panic. You are lying. You could not possibly do that. My father's lawyers would have caught it. They reviewed everything. They reviewed the prenup, I countered smoothly. They did not review the corporate filings I submitted to the state of Delaware. You gave me full access to your ledgers. Now let us talk about those credit cards you supposedly canceled. Jasmine took a hesitant step back, her confident posture crumbling. What about them? I called the bank. The accounts are frozen. You called the bank and froze the secondary cards, I explained. You froze the cards issued to you and Bradley. The primary account belongs to me. I built exceptional credit over the past 10 years while working up the corporate ladder. When we married, your father suggested we consolidate expenses to make bookkeeping easier. I issued you both authorized user cards tied to my primary account. You did not cut me off this morning. You cut yourselves off. Before either of them could formulate a coherent response, the sharp wail of police sirens pierced the quiet neighborhood. 2 patrol cruisers turned the corner, their lights flashing brightly against the morning shadows. They pulled up directly behind Bradley's sports car, blocking him in completely. 4 uniformed officers stepped out of the vehicles, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. Bradley immediately went into his polished victim routine. He rushed toward the officers, holding up his splinted hand. Officers, thank goodness you are here. My wife is having a severe mental breakdown. She attacked my mother last night, shattered my hand, and now she is trespassing on my private property, refusing to leave. The lead officer, a stern-looking woman with graying hair, held up her hand to stop his approach. Step back, sir. Who placed the emergency call? I did, officer, I called out, walking across the lawn. My name is Stella. I am the legal owner of this property. These 2 individuals vandalized my belongings and are trespassing. I pulled a folded document from my dress pocket. It was a certified copy of the property deed and the company operating agreement. I brought the paperwork, proving my absolute ownership of this estate. The officer carefully reviewed the document, scanning the official seals and signatures. She handed the papers back to me and turned to Bradley. Sir, according to these documents, she is the sole legal owner of this residence. Unless you have a lease agreement or a court order, you and the young lady need to vacate the premises immediately. This is absolutely insane, Jasmine shrieked, stomping her foot on the grass. You cannot kick us out. Do you know who our father is? The officer glared at Jasmine. I do not care who your father is. You have exactly 2 minutes to gather your things and leave, or I will arrest you both for trespassing today. Move it. Bradley glared, chest heaving with fury. This war is not over, Stella. He marched toward his car, yanking the door open. Jasmine hurried after him. They peeled away from the curb. As the police cruisers pulled away, an unmarked vehicle approached. A tall, black African-American man stepped out. It was Donovan, Jasmine's husband and former detective. He looked directly at me with a serious, calculating expression. Jasmine immediately shrieked when she saw her husband walking across the damp grass. Donovan, arrest this crazy woman right now, she demanded, stomping her expensive sneakers. She is trying to steal our family estate. Throw her in handcuffs and drag her to a cell. Bradley leaned heavily against his sports car, holding his splinted hand to his chest, wearing a nasty grin. Good to see you, Donovan, Bradley called out. Use your old police buddies to get this fraud out of my house. She thinks some fake corporate paperwork makes her untouchable. Donovan did not acknowledge his wife or his brother-in-law. He stood at 6 feet 2 inches, carrying the unmistakable authority of a man who had spent a decade working major crime units before transitioning to private investigation. He wore a sharp charcoal suit, his gaze completely unreadable. He walked right past Jasmine, completely ignoring her shrill demands, and approached the local patrol officers, who were currently documenting the trespassing incident. I watched carefully as Donovan flashed a discreet leather credential case to the lead officer. The local cops recognized him instantly. They exchanged a few quiet professional words. I could not hear the exact details, but the shift in their body language was obvious. Donovan was taking control of the volatile scene. Jasmine marched up behind her husband, grabbing his tailored sleeve. "Did you hear me, Donovan? I said arrest her." Donovan finally turned to look at his wife. His expression was cold and profoundly tired. "Go sit in your brother car, Jasmine," he ordered, his voice deep and entirely devoid of affection. "You are embarrassing yourself and you are interfering with a legal property dispute. You have zero ownership rights here. The police already verified her documents. Get off her lawn before they actually book you for trespassing." Jasmine's face flushed with pure outrage. "You are taking her side over your own wife. My father will ruin you for this." She turned on her heel and stormed back to Bradley. Bradley glared at Donovan, spitting a curse word onto the pavement before getting into his vehicle. The local officers stood by, ensuring the two hostile siblings finally backed their cars out of my private driveway. Donovan turned around and walked slowly toward me. I stood perfectly still on my porch steps, keeping my arms crossed over my ruined wedding gown. I knew Donovan was a highly skilled private investigator. I also knew he worked exclusively for Richard Dealership Empire, handling their internal security and background checks. I had every reason to view him as a massive threat. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, ensuring his back was completely turned toward the street where Bradley and Jasmine were idling at the corner stop sign. He looked me directly in the eyes. His broad shoulders blocked their view of my hands. "I need you to listen to me very carefully," Stella Donovan said, his voice dropping to a low, urgent whisper. "I am going to hand you something right now. You are going to take it, hide it in your pocket, and you are going to pretend I just handed you a standard police business card. Do you understand me?" I did not nod. I maintained a defensive, angry posture for the benefit of the watching siblings. "Why should I trust you, Donovan? You work for the man who nearly beat his wife to death last night. You are on Richard payroll." "I work for a paycheck," Stella Donovan corrected sharply. "But I do not work for monsters. I used to be a cop. I know a federal tax evasion front when I see one. I married Jasmine because I thought she was different from them, but this family is a toxic infection. I am looking for a way out, and you are currently holding the match that can burn this entire empire to the ground." He reached into his inner suit pocket. He pulled out a standard white business card, but secured perfectly flat behind. It was a small black encrypted USB flash drive. He extended his hand toward me, maintaining a stern official facial expression. "Take the card, Stella," he ordered loudly, projecting his voice so the officers near the curb could hear a generic interaction. "If you have any further issues with property damage, you contact this number directly." I reached out and took the items. I slid the flash drive seamlessly into the deep pocket of my wedding dress while examining the blank business card. "What exactly is this, Donovan?" I whispered, keeping my eyes on the card. "It is the key," Donovan murmured, stepping slightly closer. "Beatrice begged me to bring it to you. She knew you were a forensic accountant. She knew you were the only person smart enough to decode it. That drive contains 20 years of hidden banking ledgers, offshore account numbers, and photographic evidence of physical abuse. Beatrice has been secretly copying Richard private files from his home safe since Bradley was a child. She has been waiting decades for someone brave enough to stand up to him." My breath caught in my throat. 20 years of evidence. This was not just a divorce battle anymore. This was a massive federal criminal case. "You need to get inside and lock your doors right now," Donovan warned, his eyes darting toward the street. "Richard knows the drive is missing. He discovered the empty safe an hour ago. He has already dispatched his private fixers to retrieve it. They are not local cops, Stella. They are violent professionals who make problems disappear for wealthy men. They are coming for you and they will not knock. Before I asked more, Donovan walked away. He nodded to the police, got into his car, and left me alone. The reality hit me like a physical blow. I clutched the flash drive, feeling its dangerous weight against my leg. I walked inside my massive house and securely locked the heavy door. I threw the deadbolt into place and engaged the security chain. My hands were shaking, but my mind shifted into analytical mode. Donovan had warned me that Richard was sending professional fixers to retrieve the stolen flash drive. I did not have time to sit on the floor and process the trauma of my ruined wedding night. I needed to act immediately. I bypassed the living room, walking quickly down the hallway toward my home office. The morning sun was streaming through the expensive bay windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. I closed the doors of my office and locked them from the inside. I walked over to the window and pulled the blackout curtains shut, plunging the room into darkness before switching on a desk lamp. I needed absolute focus and complete digital isolation. I moved to my desk and booted up my primary workstation. As a forensic accountant, I built computer rigs designed to trace ghost funds and crack financial servers. My setup was far more advanced than anything a corporate auditor would use. I retrieved the flash drive from the pocket of my wedding dress. The plastic casing felt warm against my palm. I stared at the tiny black device, understanding the massive risk I was finally taking. Beatrice had risked her life to secure this data. I was not going to let her sacrifice be in vain. I inserted the drive into an isolated offline terminal. The computer screen flickered as the hardware recognized the foreign device. A command prompt popped up, demanding a 32-character alphanumeric decryption key. Richard had not just locked his files behind a simple password. He had used enterprise-grade encryption software, the kind usually reserved for defense contractors or international banking syndicates. He clearly believed his digital fortress was impenetrable. He forgot who he was dealing with. I cracked my knuckles and launched a brute force decryption program I had written years ago. My software began systematically hammering the encryption firewall, searching for a backdoor in the coding. Lines of green text cascaded down my monitor. I watched the progress bar inch forward, agonizingly slow. 5%, 10%. The cooling fans on my tower roared to life, fighting the immense processing strain. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my tired eyes. I thought about Beatrice lying battered in that hospital bed. I thought about the arrogance radiating from Bradley and Jasmine on my lawn. They thought my background was a weakness. They believed my childhood in a cramped apartment meant I was stupid. They failed to realize that growing up with absolutely nothing teaches you how to systematically dismantle people who have everything. The progress bar hit 40%. Suddenly, the lights in my office flickered. My secondary monitor, which was connected to the main house network, went completely black. A red warning banner flashed across the screen. Foreign intrusion detected. My heart slammed against my ribs. Someone was actively hacking into my network. Donovan was right. Richard had not just sent fixers to break down my front door. He had hired elite cybercriminals to remotely wipe any devices connected to my internet protocol address. They were trying to fry my hard drives and destroy the evidence before I could even open the files. The red warning banner multiplied, filling the screen with malware prompts. They were attempting a remote factory reset. I grabbed my keyboard, my fingers flying across the keys with desperate speed. I immediately severed the wireless connection, but they had already deployed a Trojan worm into my server. I watched in horror as the malicious code began deleting system files, hunting for the flash drive directory. I had to manually rewrite the firewall permissions in real time to block their access ports. It was a vicious digital war. They threw denial of service attacks at my router, trying to force my system to crash and reboot. If my computer rebooted, the flash drive encryption would automatically scramble the data permanently, rendering it completely useless. I typed furiously, sweating under the harsh glow of the desk lamp. I launched a defensive quarantine protocol, effectively building a digital wall around the offline terminal holding the flash drive. The hackers slammed against the quarantine wall repeatedly, their malware eating through my secondary defenses. I had seconds before they breached the final barrier. I reached down and physically ripped the Ethernet cable straight out of the wall port. The secondary monitor died. The cyber attack suddenly stopped. The room fell silent save for the roaring fans of my offline terminal. I let out a breath, wiping sweat from my forehead. I had successfully isolated the machine. They were locked out. I turned my attention back to the primary monitor. The decryption program had reached 99%. I held my breath, gripping the edge of the mahogany desk. The screen flashed bright green. Decryption successful. A single folder appeared, titled simply with the letter R. I double-clicked the file icon. Dozens of subfolders populated the screen. I expected to find hidden bank statements or photographic evidence of the physical abuse Beatrice suffered. What I actually found was worse. I opened the first spreadsheet, my eyes scanning the columns. The numbers were staggering. This was not just a wealthy man hiding a few $1 million in a divorce fund. I opened a second file, then a third. My blood ran cold as the magnitude of the criminal enterprise revealed itself. Richard was not just a successful luxury car dealer. He was operating a massive money laundering syndicate. The ledgers showed hundreds of millions of dollars flowing from the dealerships directly into anonymous offshore shell companies located in the Cayman Islands. He was defrauding the federal government on an unprecedented scale. But the most horrifying revelation was buried in a folder labeled Employee Benefits. As I scrolled through the data, a sickening realization paralyzed me. My husband Bradley was deeply involved in this criminal operation too. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding against my ribs as the horrifying truth settled in. Bradley was not just a passive beneficiary of his father's wealth. My husband was actively draining the pension funds of his own employees, stealing the futures of the hardworking people who trusted him. I needed to cross-reference these ledgers with my corporate databases at the firm immediately. I opened a secure virtual private network client, typing in my top-tier forensic auditor credentials. Access denied. I frowned, retyping my complex password. Access denied. Account suspended. A cold chill washed over me. I reached for my smartphone, dialing my managing partner direct line. The call went straight to an automated message stating the number was no longer in service. I tried the main office line. A receptionist answered, but the moment I stated my name, the line went dead. Richard had already reached them. He was not just a car dealer. He had deep, invisible ties to the city elite and the dangerous elements operating beneath it. He had used those dark connections to completely sever my professional lifeline in a matter of minutes. My phone vibrated violently on the mahogany desk. It was an alert from a prominent financial news application. I tapped the screen and my stomach plummeted. A breaking news headline glared back at me. Top forensic accountant terminated amidst massive embezzlement allegations. The article detailed completely fabricated claims that I had been funneling client funds into offshore accounts. It quoted anonymous corporate sources calling me mentally unstable and dangerous. Richard had weaponized his vast resources to launch a total smear campaign against me. In less than an hour, he had utterly destroyed the flawless professional reputation I had spent over a decade building. I was officially a pariah in the financial world. No firm would ever hire me. No client would ever trust me. I watched helplessly as my email inbox flooded with cancellation notices, hateful messages from former colleagues, and automated alerts from professional credentialing boards, suspending my licenses, pending a full investigation. Richard wanted me completely isolated, entirely broke, and utterly discredited before he sent his men to finish me off. He was systematically stripping away every single layer of my armor, ensuring nobody would ever believe a word I said if I managed to survive the night. I closed the laptop and shoved the encrypted flash drive back into my pocket. I could not stay in the house. The electronic perimeter was secure for now, but Richard's hired muscle would not be deterred by locked doors forever. I needed to move, and I needed an ally who understood the violent tactics of the men hunting me. My burner phone, a device I kept strictly for secure client communications, buzzed in my bag. I pulled it out and read a single encrypted text message. Leave through the service exit. Walk 2 blocks east. Do not bring your primary phone. I recognized the encrypted signature immediately. It was Donovan. I quickly changed out of my ruined wedding dress, throwing on dark jeans, a black hooded sweater, and running shoes. I grabbed a tactical backpack, shoving my offline laptop, the flash drive, and a few emergency supplies inside. I left my primary smartphone sitting on the kitchen counter to act as a decoy beacon for anyone tracking my location. I slipped out the back service door, moving silently through the dense hedges lining the property. I kept to the shadows, avoiding the glow of the streetlights as I briskly walked 2 blocks east to the designated location. An unmarked gray sedan idled quietly in the alleyway behind an abandoned commercial bakery. The passenger door swung open as I approached. I climbed inside, shutting the door firmly. Donovan sat behind the wheel, his broad frame tense, his eyes scanning the dark street through the rearview mirror. He looked exhausted, the heavy burden of the past 24 hours etched deeply into his face. He put the car in gear and drove us away from the affluent neighborhood, navigating through a maze of backstreets until we reached a desolate, off-the-grid industrial park on the outskirts of the city. He killed the engine and turned to face me. The silence in the car was suffocating. "You are completely radioactive right now," Stella Donovan stated, his voice a low, serious rumble. Richard called in every favor he had. The police chief, the corporate board members, the local media syndicates. They are all painting you as a psychotic, violent criminal who attacked your own family and stole corporate secrets. He is putting a massive bounty on your head in the underground networks. Everyone is searching for you right now. I gripped the strap of my backpack. "I know what he is doing," I replied steadily. "I saw the news alerts. He froze my accounts and ruined my career. But I have the flash drive, Donovan. I cracked the encryption. I saw the Cayman Island accounts. I saw the pension funds Bradley emptied. We have enough evidence to put them all in federal prison for the rest of their miserable lives. Why do not we just drive straight to the federal authorities right now and end this whole nightmare tonight?" Donovan gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles turning white. He looked away, staring out into the bleak, empty industrial lot. "Because we cannot go to the authorities yet," Stella Donovan whispered, a profound, agonizing defeat lacing his words. "Richard knows I handed you that flash drive. He knows I betrayed the family. Before I could even leave your neighborhood this morning, Richard sent 2 of his deadliest enforcers to my parents' house. They are holding my mother and father hostage in their own living room. If I contact the local police, or if you release that decrypted data to the federal agents right now, Richard will execute my parents without a single second thought. We need a brilliant plan right now. We need a brilliant plan right now." Donovan gripped the steering wheel tightly, the leather creaking under his hands. I stared at him through the dim lighting of the industrial park, the reality of his situation settling heavily on my shoulders. Richard was holding 2 innocent elderly people hostage. This was a lethal situation involving a heavily armed criminal syndicate. I took a deep breath, forcing my mind to compartmentalize terror. "We cannot panic," I told Donovan, pulling my offline laptop from the backpack at my feet. "Panic is exactly what Richard expects. He thinks he neutralized his biggest threats by isolating me and compromising you. But he made one critical miscalculation. He severely underestimated the data sitting on this hard drive." I opened the laptop lid, the harsh blue light illuminating the dark sedan. "If we want your parents to survive, we cannot negotiate. We need absolute, undeniable leverage. We need to find the specific financial artery, keeping his criminal empire alive, and threaten to sever it permanently." Donovan shifted in the driver's seat, his eyes scanning the deserted lot. "Do it," he ordered, his voice laced with desperate intensity. "Find the kill switch, Stella." I navigated into the decrypted folder labeled with the letter R. I opened the master spreadsheet detailing the corporate structure of the luxury car dealerships. I explained my forensic process as my fingers flew across the keyboard. "Richard operates 7 high-end dealerships across the eastern seaboard," I stated, analyzing cash flow columns. Dealerships are notorious fronts for money laundering because they deal in massive, irregular cash transactions. But Richard is not just washing street money. He is draining his own legitimate corporate revenue to avoid federal taxation. I pulled up a document titled Vendor Relations. "Look at this routing data." I pointed to the screen. He created a phantom network of third-party service providers. These fake companies bill his dealerships millions every month for consulting fees and software that simply does not exist. Donovan squinted at the complex tables. "Where is that phantom money going?" It is funneled directly into offshore shell companies, I replied, tracing the international wire transfer codes. Specifically, a holding corporation registered in the Caymans. The Caymans offer zero corporate tax rates and absolute banking secrecy. The government does not require companies to disclose beneficial owners to foreign tax authorities. Richard set up a corporate entity called Apex Global. He takes clean money from his American dealerships, uses fake vendor invoices to claim massive corporate losses, and ships the profits straight to Apex Global. By the time he files his domestic tax returns, his dealerships look like they are barely breaking even. He pays zero federal taxes while hoarding hundreds of millions in untraceable offshore accounts. Donovan let out a low whistle. That is classic corporate fraud. But how does that give us leverage to save my parents? Richard will deny he owns Apex Global. The Cayman banks will never cooperate without a federal subpoena, and we do not have time to wait for the authorities. We do not need the Cayman banks to cooperate, I countered, scanning the hidden metadata attached to the wire transfers. Richard is arrogant. He thinks the offshore firewall is impenetrable, so he got sloppy with his domestic routing protocols. I opened a hidden subfolder containing PDF copies of the wire transfer authorizations. To move this capital internationally, without triggering federal money laundering alerts, he structured the payments through a domestic clearinghouse. I typed a rapid sequence of search commands into the terminal. And there it is. The clearinghouse is a private wealth management firm located right here. If I can isolate the specific digital signatures authorizing these transfers, I can prove Richard is the sole beneficial owner of the Cayman accounts. We can threaten to send this paper trail to the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. A federal asset seizure threat will force him to release your parents immediately. I expanded the search parameters, diving deeper into the encrypted architecture. I bypassed the Cayman ledgers and opened the folder labeled Employee Benefits. I needed to cross-reference the offshore transfers with the internal payroll accounts to ensure Richard was not using employees as unwitting mules. As the pension data populated the screen, my forensic instincts detected a massive discrepancy. The numbers did not align with the Cayman Island laundering scheme. This was an entirely different financial operation. I scrutinized the deposit histories for the employee retirement accounts. Richard employed over 2,000 people. A portion of their monthly salaries was automatically deducted and deposited into a unified pension fund. But the fund was completely hollow. Millions of dollars had been siphoned out over the past 3 years. Donovan, look at this, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Someone is draining the retirement accounts. They use an automated script to skim 5% off the top of every pension deposit before the funds even reach the holding bank. Donovan frowned, watching the screen. Richard is stealing from his employees to feed the Cayman accounts. No, I replied, shaking my head as I traced the digital signature attached to the skimming script. That is the terrifying part. This money is not going to the Cayman Islands. It is not going to Richard Offshore Holding Company. The routing protocols are different. The stolen pension funds are funneled into a volatile cryptocurrency exchange. I highlighted the digital footprint authorizing the cryptocurrency transfers. Richard uses a classic laundering method. This pension theft is a sophisticated automated cybercrime requiring advanced coding skills. I pulled up the user activity logs associated with the theft and cross-referenced the login credentials against the master employee directory. My blood turned to absolute ice as the identity of the thief flashed onto the screen in bright green text. I stared at the name, my chest tightening with a sickening realization. It was not Richard stealing the retirement funds. It was Bradley. I looked at Donovan, the harsh blue glow of the laptop screen illuminating the profound shock settling across his face as he processed the revelation. My violent husband was not a pathetic pawn following his father. Bradley was the sole mastermind behind the massive pension embezzlement, operating completely independently from the Cayman Island laundering scheme. He is stealing from his own father, Donovan whispered, leaning closer to the monitor. Richard thinks the pension funds are safely acting as a buffer for the dealership corporate taxes. If Richard finds out Bradley is siphoning that capital into cryptocurrency wallets, they will tear each other apart. I shook my head, fingers flying across the keyboard to isolate transaction hashes. We do not have time to wait for a family implosion. I need to compile this forensic evidence right now and format it for the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. I opened a new encrypted directory and began pulling exact routing numbers, digital wallet addresses, and administrative login timestamps, linking Bradley directly to the stolen millions. I merged that data with Richard offshore Cayman ledgers, creating a comprehensive digital prosecution file that no defense attorney could dismantle. I connected 2 fresh flash drives to the terminal. I initiated a rapid data transfer mirroring the prosecution file onto both physical drives. One for you, one for me, I instructed, watching the progress bars surge forward. If we get separated, this evidence survives. We hand this to the federal authorities and leverage the impending asset seizure to force Richard to release your parents. Donovan suddenly raised his hand, gesturing for absolute silence. He turned his head toward the driver's side window, scanning the desolate industrial park. Bright halogen headlights cut through the heavy darkness at the far end of the lot. Then a second pair appeared. 2 massive black sport utility vehicles rolled slowly past the abandoned warehouses, moving with predatory precision. They found us, Donovan stated, his voice laced with lethal readiness. Richard fixers tracked my vehicle. Grab the drives and hold on tight. I ripped the flash drives from the computer and slammed the laptop shut, shoving it into my tactical backpack. Donovan threw the sedan into gear and slammed his foot on the accelerator. The tires shrieked against the cracked asphalt as we shot forward, abandoning the shadows. The black vehicles instantly reacted, their engines roaring as they accelerated to intercept us. Donovan spun the steering wheel violently, throwing us into a sharp left turn down a narrow alleyway lined with rusted shipping containers. The sedan fishtailed, clipping a stack of wooden pallets before regaining traction. I braced my hands against the dashboard, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Call the police," I yelled over the roaring engine. "I cannot," Donovan replied, his eyes darting between the windshield and the rearview mirror. "Richard owns the dispatchers in this district. If I call for backup, they will route the call directly to his private security team. We have to lose them in the city grid." The black vehicle surged out of a cross street, attempting to ram our passenger side. Donovan hit the brakes hard. The attacker flew past our front bumper, missing us by mere inches and smashing through a chain-link fence. Donovan immediately threw the car into reverse, spun the vehicle 180 degrees, and accelerated back toward the main industrial artery leading into the city. The second vehicle was hot on our tail, its high beams blinding us through the rear window. Donovan merged onto the interstate access road, pushing the sedan well over 90 miles per hour. We weaved dangerously through the late-night commercial traffic, narrowly dodging transport trucks and concrete barriers. The fixers matched our every move, steadily gaining ground. "Take the next exit," I ordered, opening my laptop and connecting it to my burner phone hotspot. The downtown financial district has automated traffic control systems. I can access the municipal grid and override the light cycles. Donovan swerved across 3 lanes of traffic without using a blinker, taking the sharp exit ramp at terrifying speed. We hit the downtown streets, the towering skyscrapers creating a canyon of glass and steel around us. The pursuing men stayed locked onto our rear bumper. I accessed the city open data portal, executing a rapid script I had designed years ago. I found the traffic control node for the upcoming intersection. "Turn left on 4th Avenue, I shouted, watching the digital map on my screen. I hit the execute command just as Donovan ripped the steering wheel to the left. The traffic lights for the cross street instantly turned green, while the lights behind us slammed to red. A massive garbage truck legally entered the intersection, completely blocking the path of the pursuing men. The sound of screeching brakes and crunching metal echoed through the city blocks as the fixers collided with the side of the garbage truck. "Keep driving." Donovan navigated through 5 more blocks before pulling into a subterranean garage beneath a massive corporate plaza. He drove down 3 levels, parking tightly between 2 concrete support pillars. We sat in the pitch-black vehicle, our chests heaving as we gasped for air. "We lost them." Donovan breathed, resting his forehead against the steering wheel. I nodded, reaching into my backpack to secure the flash drives. My burner phone suddenly vibrated in my pocket. I pulled the device out. It was a text message from an unknown number. Attached was a high-resolution photograph. I stared at the image, my blood turning to absolute ice. The photo showed Beatrice. She was tied to a metal chair in a concrete room, her face battered and terrified. Standing right beside her, holding a heavy steel wrench, was Bradley. A second text message popped onto the screen containing a horrifying ultimatum. Bring the flash drive and sign the house over within 1 hour. If you involve police or agents, my mother has a fatal accident. I stared at the glowing screen of my burner phone. My breathing stopped. The image of Beatrice bound to a metal chair burned into my mind. Her face was bruised and genuine terror radiated from her eyes. Bradley stood beside his mother, gripping a steel wrench with his uninjured hand. He looked deranged, stripped of the polished corporate mask he wore for cameras. Donovan leaned over the console of the dark sedan, his jaw clenched tight, a muscle ticking in his cheek. But seeing his mother-in-law held hostage by her son struck a different nerve. Bradley is completely out of his mind. Donovan growled, his voice vibrating with rage. He is holding her at the old shipyard warehouse down by the waterfront. I recognize the structural pillars in the background. We need to move now. My phone vibrated again. I met Donovan's gaze. He gave me an affirming nod. I accepted the call and put it on speakerphone, keeping the device resting on my palm. Listen to me carefully. Stella, Bradley hissed through the speaker. You have exactly 1 hour. You are going to bring that flash drive, your laptop, and the legal transfer documents for the Delaware Limited Liability Company holding the house. If I see a single police cruiser, or if you contact your federal auditor friends, my mother will unfortunately suffer a fatal fall down concrete stairs. It will be a tragic accident. Do you understand? I forced my voice to remain perfectly flat and analytical. You are making a massive tactical error, Bradley. You are committing federal kidnapping and extortion. Hurting Beatrice will not erase the digital footprint linking your administrative login to those cryptocurrency wallets. Shut up, Bradley screamed, the sound of metal striking concrete echoing through the phone line. You do not dictate terms to me. I want the deed and I want the offshore evidence destroyed. You ruined my hand. You ruined my public reputation. Now you are going to give me back everything you stole. Donovan leaned closer to the microphone, his deep voice cutting through Bradley's hysterical rant. If you lay one more finger on Beatrice, I will personally ensure you never walk again, Bradley. You are a dead man walking. Bradley let out a sharp, breathless laugh. My father already has your parents surrounded, Donovan. You are entirely powerless here. Both of you are out of options. Now listen to my exact instructions. My father is convening an emergency shareholder meeting at the corporate headquarters in 1 hour to address the terrible media leaks about you, Stella. They expect a public execution of your professional character. You will bring the documents and the drive directly to the executive boardroom. Why the boardroom, Bradley? Why not the warehouse where you are currently holding Beatrice? Because I want to see you humiliated in front of every major investor we have, Bradley snarled, his arrogance briefly overshadowing his panic. You will walk into that room, sign the asset transfer papers, and publicly confess that you fabricated the embezzlement allegations due to a mental breakdown. You will clear my name and you will hand the flash drive directly to my father. Only then will I release my mother from this warehouse. If you deviate from this script, she dies. The line went dead. I lowered the phone, staring into the dark parking garage. He wants a public spectacle, I stated, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. He wants to leverage the shareholder meeting to restore his public image and legally secure the real estate assets. Donovan started the car engine, the powerful motor roaring to life in the confined space. He shifted the vehicle into gear. He made a fatal tactical error, Stella. He split their forces. Richard is at the corporate headquarters waiting for you. Bradley is at the waterfront warehouse holding Beatrice. They think we have to choose between saving my parents or saving Beatrice. I grabbed my tactical bag, securing the freshly copied flash drives containing the Internal Revenue Service prosecution files. I pulled out my laptop and prepared the official information referral form for the federal authorities. We do not have to choose, Donovan. I will take the corporate headquarters. I will walk right into that emergency shareholder meeting and face Richard. I will stall them with the asset transfer negotiations. That gives you exactly 1 hour to breach the waterfront warehouse and extract Beatrice. Donovan turned the steering wheel, guiding the sedan up the circular concrete ramp toward the city streets. The morning sun was just beginning to rise over the skyline, casting a harsh, cold light across the glass skyscrapers. It is a massive risk, Stella. You will be completely alone in a room full of powerful men who want you destroyed. They will have their corporate security team blocking every exit. I am not afraid of Richard or his investors, I replied, securing the heavy backpack over my shoulders. They rely on intimidation and physical violence because they do not understand how forensic data works. They think a signed piece of paper will save them from a federal tax evasion indictment. I will give them the spectacle they want. Donovan pulled the car to a stop near a busy downtown subway entrance, 2 blocks away from the towering glass structure of Richard corporate headquarters. He looked at me, his dark eyes filled with absolute determination. Once I secure Beatrice, I will send you a secure text message. Do not make your final move until you get my signal. I nodded solemnly. I will be ready, I promised, opening the passenger door and stepping out into the chilly morning air. I shut the door firmly, watching Donovan speed away toward the waterfront. I turned around and looked up at the towering corporate building looming above me. I gripped the strap of my backpack, took a deep breath, and began walking. I agreed to meet them at the upcoming emergency shareholder meeting, walking directly into the lion's den. I pushed a small wireless communication earpiece deep into my right ear canal, concealing it entirely beneath my loose hair. I tapped the microphone pinned discreetly inside the collar of my dark sweater to verify the secure connection. Donovan's deep, steady breathing echoed softly through the encrypted audio channel. We were operating on a simultaneous timeline, completely reliant on flawless synchronization. While I marched toward the towering glass doors of Richard corporate headquarters, my brave brother-in-law was speeding toward the derelict waterfront to execute a high-risk rescue operation. We had one massive tactical advantage that Bradley knew absolutely nothing about. Months before this violent wedding night ever occurred, Donovan had secretly provided Beatrice with an unregistered burner phone. He had hardwired the device to bypass standard cellular towers, programming it to ping a private satellite network only he could access. He had specifically instructed his mother-in-law to keep it hidden in the lining of her designer purse for emergency situations just like this one. I approached the polished granite security desk in the massive corporate lobby. 2 armed guards wearing tailored suits stepped forward, their hands resting cautiously on their belts. They had clearly been given strict orders regarding my arrival. I did not wait for them to speak. I am Stella, I announced, my voice echoing in the cavernous atrium. Richard is expecting me in the executive boardroom right now. The senior guard narrowed his eyes, speaking quietly into his wrist microphone before giving me a curt nod. He pointed a rigid finger toward a private glass-enclosed elevator reserved exclusively for the highest-ranking executives. I walked past him, my posture projecting absolute confidence, while internally, my focus remained entirely on the audio feed playing in my ear. Donovan, I whispered softly, keeping my head down as the elevator doors glided shut. I am in the building. Give me a status update on your current location. The elevator began its rapid ascent toward the top floor of the skyscraper. I am entering the shipyard grid right now, Donovan replied, his voice tense but incredibly focused over the secure channel. The geographical coordinates from Beatrice's hidden burner phone are pinging from Warehouse Sector 4. It is a completely abandoned commercial shipping zone. The city cut power to this grid 3 years ago. If Bradley is using electricity in that building, he is running a portable generator. I can use the thermal output of the generator exhaust to pinpoint the exact structure. I watched the illuminated floor numbers climb higher and higher on the elevator display. Be careful, Donovan. Bradley might be unhinged, but the men Richard hired to help him are highly trained professionals. They will establish a secure perimeter before they torture her. Donovan let out a low, confident scoff. They are corporate fixers, Stella. They are used to intimidating unarmed accountants and terrifying rival business owners. I spent 8 years doing tactical raids with the Federal Narcotics Task Force. They have absolutely no idea what is about to hit them. The elevator passed the 30th floor. The pressure in my ears shifted, mirroring the mounting tension in my chest. Over the earpiece, I heard the crunch of gravel as Donovan parked his vehicle several blocks away from the target zone. The audio feed picked up the metallic click of a heavy firearm being chambered and readied. I am making my approach on foot. Donovan whispered, his breathing slowing down into a controlled, rhythmic pattern. I have visual confirmation on Warehouse 4. The windows are entirely blacked out with heavy industrial plastic, but there is a faint light bleeding through the rusted loading dock doors. I am seeing 2 armed hostiles patrolling the exterior perimeter. They are walking a standard, overlapping guard route. Sloppy. They are leaving a 10-second blind spot on the corner every time they cross paths. "Can you take them both quietly?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs as the elevator reached the 40th floor. "I do not plan on being quiet," Donovan stated, a dangerous edge sharpening his tone. "Quiet takes too much time, and we have less than 30 minutes before you have to hand over those flash drives. I am going to hit them fast, hard, and loud. It will force anyone inside the warehouse to rush the loading dock to defend the perimeter. That draws them away from Beatrice. You just focus on getting into that boardroom and keeping Richard and Bradley distracted. Do not let them check their phones. Do not let them look away from you for a single second." The elevator chimed softly, indicating I had reached the penthouse level. The glass doors slid open, revealing a sprawling, opulent reception area lined with expensive modern art and mahogany paneling. At the far end of the corridor were the towering double doors of the executive boardroom. 4 massive security contractors stood shoulder to shoulder in front of the entrance, their arms crossed, staring directly at me. I stepped out of the elevator, my tactical backpack feeling heavy against my spine. "I am at the boardroom," I whispered into my collar. "I am going in. Make sure you get her out alive, Donovan." I heard the sound of Donovan boots crunching rapidly across the gravel over the audio feed. He was sprinting toward the blind spot he had identified. "I am breaching the perimeter right now," Donovan replied, his voice accelerating with pure adrenaline. "I will send the secure signal the absolute second she is safe. Give them hell, Stella." I heard a sudden violent crash over the earpiece as Donovan intercepted the first exterior guard. The sickening thud of bone connecting with solid concrete echoed sharply through the audio channel, followed immediately by shouts of alarm from the second mercenary. Gunfire erupted, the deafening blasts ringing directly into my ear. I took a deep, steadying breath, ignoring the sounds of brutal physical confrontation miles away, and marched straight toward the imposing boardroom doors. I bypassed the 4 massive security contractors positioned outside. I shoved the heavy mahogany doors inward with all my strength, letting them slam against the walls with a resounding crash. The executive boardroom was opulent, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the city. A massive walnut table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by leather chairs. Every chair was occupied by powerful investors wearing bespoke suits. The low murmur of aggressive corporate negotiations instantly died. Every pair of eyes snapped toward me. I stood there wearing damp running shoes, dark jeans, and a black hooded sweater, clutching my tactical backpack. I was a glaring anomaly in their pristine world. At the head of the table stood Richard, projecting the aura of a billionaire kingpin. Beside him stood Bradley, his right hand encased in a medical splint. Guards rushed in behind me, reaching out to grab my shoulders. Richard raised his hand, gesturing for them to stand down. His face broke into a sickening smile. He believed his extortion had worked flawlessly. "Let her in," Richard commanded, his voice carrying effortless authority. "This is the distressed young woman we were just discussing. Everyone allow me to introduce Stella, my son, soon-to-be ex-wife." Whispers erupted around the table. Investors stared at me with profound disgust. Bradley stepped forward, leaning against the walnut table. His lip curled into a sneer. "You look like trash." Stella Bradley mocked loudly. "Did you walk all the way here from the gutter you grew up in? I see you realized your accounting tricks mean nothing in the real world." I kept my expression blank, maintaining steady breathing. Through the hidden earpiece, I could hear Donovan fighting for his life against Richard-hired mercenaries. Muffled shouts and the impact of fists echoed in my ear. I had to buy Donovan more time. I walked toward the head of the table, ignoring their hostile glares. "Why am I here, Richard?" I asked clearly. "You demanded my presence. Let us get this over with." Richard gestured to an empty chair. He slid legal documents across the wood. The papers stopped right at the edge of the table. "You are here to fix the massive public relations nightmare you caused this morning," Richard stated, dropping his friendly facade. "You contacted the press. You leaked fabricated stories about my dealerships and my son. Our stock valuation took a significant hit today because of your psychotic, vindictive lies. Now you are going to repair the damage." I looked down at the thick stack of papers. The top document was a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. Beneath it was an absolute transfer of ownership for the Delaware Limited Liability Company, holding the marital estate. Finally, there was a pre-written public statement confessing that I had suffered a severe mental breakdown and fabricated every single embezzlement allegation due to intense emotional instability. "Sign the papers," Stella Bradley demanded, circling around the table until he stood mere inches away from me. "You are going to sign the asset transfer relinquishing the house back to our family trust. Then you are going to stand in front of these respected shareholders and read that public confession aloud. You will look them in the eyes and admit you are a crazy, desperate gold digger who tried to ruin my flawless reputation because I asked for a divorce." I stared at the documents, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could hear the desperate struggle continuing over the radio frequency. Donovan was breathing heavily, the sound of tearing metal and shattering glass vibrating through my earpiece. The extraction was taking longer than anticipated. The mercenaries were putting up a brutal fight. If I signed these papers right now and handed over the encrypted flash drive, Richard would immediately signal his men at the warehouse to eliminate Beatrice and Donovan. They never intended to let either of them walk away alive. They just needed me to surrender my only leverage first. I reached into my tactical backpack and slowly pulled out my offline laptop. I set it deliberately on the polished walnut table right next to the stack of legal documents. I unzipped the front pocket and retrieved the encrypted flash drive, placing it carefully on top of the closed laptop. The executives around the table leaned forward, their eyes locking onto the small black device. "That is the data," I stated calmly, looking directly at Richard. "Everything you want is sitting right here." Richard's eyes gleamed with raw, unrestrained greed. He picked up an expensive gold fountain pen from his desk blotter and held it out to me. "Then pick up the pen and sign your name on the dotted line." "Stella," Richard ordered, his voice dropping to a dangerous, threatening register. "You do not have any other options. You know exactly what happens if you refuse." Bradley leaned in close, pressing his chest against my shoulder. His hot breath brushed against my neck as he whispered, so only I could hear. "If you do not sign that paper in the next 10 seconds, I am calling the warehouse. I will make sure my mother falls down those concrete stairs head first." I slowly wrapped my fingers around the cold metal of the gold fountain pen, pulling it directly from his grasp. I stared down at the signature line on the non-disclosure agreement. The silence in the massive boardroom was absolutely deafening. Every single billionaire investor held their breath, waiting for me to surrender my dignity and my life. I pressed its tip against the paper. I held my hand perfectly still, stalling for precious seconds. I squeezed my eyes shut for a brief moment, listening desperately to the tiny speaker hidden inside my ear, praying to hear Donovan give the designated safety signal. Bradley tapped his expensive watch, a cruel smile twisting his face. "Your time is officially up, Stella," he growled. I kept the heavy gold pen pressed firmly against the crisp white parchment, allowing a single bead of sweat to roll slowly down my temple. The silence in the massive executive boardroom was suffocating. Before I could make my next move, the heavy mahogany doors swung open once more. Jasmine marched into the room, her designer heels clicking aggressively against the polished hardwood floor. She wore a pristine white business suit, looking completely unfazed by the morning chaos. She walked straight toward the long walnut table, her sharp eyes locking immediately onto my tactical backpack and the encrypted flash drive resting near my hands. She crossed her arms over her chest, letting out a loud, theatrical sigh of absolute disgust. "You are making a complete fool of yourself," Stella Jasmine announced, her shrill voice echoing off the floor-to-ceiling windows. "I cannot believe you actually showed up here dressed like a homeless vagrant. You really thought you could manipulate my father and ruin my brother's flawless reputation with your delusional lies. Look at you. You are shaking. Just sign the transfer papers and crawl back to whatever pathetic slum you came from. We are entirely sick of dealing with your psychotic episodes. You have caused this family enough embarrassment for one lifetime." I did not lift my gaze from the legal documents. I needed to keep them focused entirely on me. I needed to draw their hatred and their arrogance away from the hidden radio frequency playing in my ear. The audio feed crackled with terrifying static. Donovan was breathing heavily, his voice completely silent, as he moved through the abandoned shipyard warehouse. Every second I stalled was another second he had to find Beatrice and get her to safety. I shifted my weight, pretending that my hands were trembling from fear rather than raw adrenaline. "What is the meaning of this disruption?" A loud voice boomed from the opposite end of the conference table. A wealthy investor with silver hair slammed his hand flat against the wood. He glared fiercely at Richard. "We convened this emergency meeting to discuss the disastrous media leaks and plummeting stock valuation. We did not fly here to watch your unstable ex-daughter-in-law throw a temper tantrum. Have security remove her right now. We have millions on the line." A second investor, a woman wearing sharp glasses, leaned forward. She pointed a manicured finger directly at Bradley. "The press is reporting massive embezzlement allegations tied to your specific credentials. Our portfolios are bleeding capital. We demand a clear explanation regarding these offshore accounts. Why is this hysterical woman standing in our boardroom holding a flash drive? If she is having a mental breakdown, why is she dictating the terms of this meeting?" Richard held up both hands, projecting the calm of a corporate predator. "Please remain calm," Richard stated, his voice dripping with false reassurance. "This entire situation is fully under control. My son made the unfortunate mistake of marrying an unstable woman. When Bradley asked for a divorce, she suffered a psychological collapse. She fabricated these embezzlement stories to extort us for a real estate payout. The drive contains nothing but forged documents and paranoid delusions. She is signing a full retraction right now. Once she signs, our stock prices will stabilize and we can resume normal operations." Jasmine walked closer to my side of the table, her eyes flashing with triumph. "You heard my father, Stella. The game is over. Nobody in this room believes a single word you say. You are surrounded by the most powerful financial minds in the city. You are just a basic accountant who failed miserably. Sign the paper. Give my father the flash drive. If you do exactly what you are told, maybe we will not press extortion charges. Maybe we will let you walk away with nothing." Bradley leaned down again, his face so close to mine I could smell his cologne. "I am losing my patience, Stella," he whispered viciously, keeping his voice hidden from the angry investors. "My men at the warehouse are waiting for my command. If that pen does not move across that paper right now, I am making the call. My mother will not survive the next 5 minutes." My chest tightened painfully. The silence over the hidden earpiece was absolute torture. Had Donovan failed? Were Richard hired mercenaries too strong for him to defeat alone? I gripped the gold pen so tightly my knuckles turned completely white. I stared at the blank signature line on the non-disclosure agreement. The investors continued shouting demands at Richard. Jasmine continued spewing her toxic insults. Bradley stood over me like a grinning vulture, ready to signal the execution of his own mother. The pressure was crushing, a heavy, suffocating weight pressing down on my lungs. I needed a miracle. I needed a sign. I needed Donovan to break the terrifying radio silence. I slowly lowered the tip of the gold pen toward the crisp white paper. I dragged the ink across the page, deliberately forming the first letter of my first name. I moved at an agonizingly slow pace, drawing out the final seconds. Bradley let out a soft, victorious chuckle. Richard smiled broadly at the anxious shareholders, gesturing toward my moving hand as proof of his absolute control. Suddenly, a sharp, violent vibration erupted from the pocket of my dark jeans. My burner phone was ringing. The sudden mechanical buzz cut through the noise of the chaotic boardroom. I completely froze. I lifted the pen away from the paper, leaving the signature unfinished. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small device. The screen illuminated brightly in the dim room. A single encrypted text message flashed across the digital display. I stared at the glowing words, my heart surging with a massive, unstoppable wave of pure adrenaline. It was a message from Donovan. Package secured, burn them down. The absolute certainty of Donovan's message washed over me instantly, obliterating the suffocating pressure that had been crushing my lungs. Beatrice was safe. I looked up from the glowing screen of my burner phone, my eyes locking directly onto Bradley's smug, expectant face. I gripped the gold pen with both hands. I applied sharp pressure, snapping the metal barrel in half. Ink exploded across the mahogany table, splattering violently over the legal documents and staining Bradley's pristine cuffs. Bradley jumped back, letting out a sharp yelp of surprise as the dark ink ruined his custom suit. "What is wrong with you?" Bradley shouted, his voice cracking with sudden panic as he stared at the ruined paperwork. "Have you lost your mind?" Richard slammed his fist onto the table, his carefully constructed facade of corporate diplomacy instantly dissolving. "Security," Richard bellowed, pointing a rigid finger at me. "Remove this deranged woman from my boardroom immediately." I did not flinch. I grabbed an auxiliary display cable resting in the center console and jammed the connector straight into my laptop. I bypassed their internal network, completely forcing my encrypted hard drive to mirror directly onto the massive presentation screen dominating the executive boardroom. "Nobody touch me," I commanded. I tapped the enter key on my laptop. The blank projection screen instantly flared to life, casting a harsh blue glow across the faces of the stunned billionaires. "I am a forensic accountant, and I am officially taking control of this shareholder meeting." The security contractors stepped forward, but a silver-haired investor threw his hands up, blocking their path. "Wait," he ordered, staring at the data cascading across the screen. "Let her speak. I want to see exactly what she is projecting." Richard rushed toward the wall panel, frantically hitting buttons to kill the display feed, but I had already locked the hardware input through my operating system. "Turn that screen off," Richard roared. "She is broadcasting fabricated lies. This is corporate sabotage." "What you are looking at is the absolute truth behind this luxury car dealership empire," I announced, pulling up the first set of hidden ledgers. I highlighted the columns showing massive cash flows exiting their domestic accounts. Richard has been utilizing a vast network of phantom third-party service providers to generate fraudulent vendor invoices. He claims hundreds of millions of dollars in fake corporate losses every single fiscal year to illegally evade federal taxation. A female investor stood up, reading the digital routing numbers. "Where is the capital actually going?" she demanded, pointing at the screen. I clicked a second file displaying the offshore wire transfer authorizations. "It is being funneled through a domestic clearinghouse directly into anonymous offshore shell companies located in the Cayman Islands," I explained, highlighting Richard's specific digital signatures. "Richard is the sole beneficial owner. He has been stealing from this company and hiding profits in untraceable banks, completely defrauding every investor sitting in this room." The boardroom erupted into absolute chaos. Shareholders began shouting, pulling out their smartphones and demanding immediate. But Richard was hyperventilating, his eyes darting wildly around the room like a trapped animal. "It gets substantially worse," I yelled over the rising cacophony of angry investors. I switched the display to the employee benefits folder. I highlighted the pension fund deposit histories, placing them side by side with the automated skimming scripts. While Richard was busy evading federal taxes, Bradley decided to run his own independent criminal operation. Bradley has been actively siphoning 5% off the top of every single employee pension deposit for the past 3 years. Bradley's face turned the color of ash. He took a staggering step backward, gripping his splinted hand against his chest as if he might vomit. "That is a lie," Bradley stammered, his voice weak and pathetic. "She hacked into my credentials. I projected the user activity logs, exposing the exact transaction hashes. He used your very own employee retirement accounts as his personal piggy bank." I continued relentlessly. "He funneled those stolen millions into volatile cryptocurrency exchanges to fuel his lavish lifestyle. The money is completely gone. Bradley stole the future of every hardworking mechanic, salesman, and receptionist in your employment. The silver-haired investor threw his leather portfolio onto the table, his face twisted with absolute fury. "You incompetent criminals!" the investor roared, turning his wrath entirely on Richard. "You used our capital to run a federal money laundering syndicate. We will bankrupt you. We will tear this entire family apart." Jasmine covered her mouth, finally realizing the catastrophic magnitude of the situation. Her perfect, wealthy world was evaporating before her very eyes. "Dad, say something," Jasmine pleaded, her voice cracking with desperation. "Tell them she forged this data." Richard did not answer his daughter. His gaze locked onto me, his eyes burning with a dark, murderous rage that stripped away every ounce of his corporate civility. He realized his entire empire had just been burned to the ground by the woman he thought was nothing but disposable trash. With a primal, deafening roar, Richard lunged across the space separating us. He knocked a heavy black leather chair out of his way, his large hands reaching out violently to wrap around my throat. He intended to kill me right there in front of the entire board of directors. I did not retreat. I planted my feet firmly on the hardwood floor, staring directly into the eyes of the monster who had terrorized his wife and underestimated my strength. I raised my chin, my voice cutting through his blind rage like a razor blade. "Go ahead and touch me, Richard," I challenged, refusing to yield a single inch of ground. "It will not change a thing." I already transmitted the fully unencrypted files to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation 10 minutes before I walked through those doors. Richard froze just inches from my face. His large hands, extended to strangle the life out of me, began to tremble uncontrollably. The mention of the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division hit him like a physical blow. Corporate thugs and private mercenaries were adversaries he understood and could easily buy off. Federal agents executing asset seizures were a completely different reality. He slowly lowered his hands, stepping back as if the mahogany floor beneath him had suddenly turned to hot coals. I did not break eye contact. I reached down to my laptop keyboard and pressed a single button. The massive projection screen shifted from the complex offshore routing ledgers to a crisp official government document. The bold black letters at the top of the screen commanded the absolute attention of every single billionaire in the executive boardroom. It was an Internal Revenue Service Form 3949A. The document is officially known as an information referral. The exact form used to report suspected illegal activity, including massive tax fraud and money laundering. I filled this out very carefully over the past hour. I announced, my voice echoing clearly through the stunned silence of the room. I included every single piece of forensic data required to initiate an immediate federal raid. I documented the exact mechanisms of your fraud. Richard, your network of phantom service providers generated exactly $142 million in fraudulent corporate losses over the past 5 years. You washed those funds through the domestic clearinghouse and shipped them directly into your Cayman Island holding company, Apex Global. The silver-haired investor gasped, sinking heavily into his leather chair. $142 million, he repeated, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. You told us those losses were due to supply chain disruptions and aggressive market expansion. You promised us the margins would correct themselves this quarter. He lied to you to fund his illegal offshore empire, I stated firmly, pointing directly at Richard. And the federal government does not simply ask for the stolen taxes back. They apply massive penalty multipliers. With the interest, the evasion penalties, and the criminal fines, the federal authorities will seize every single corporate asset you own, just to cover the initial debt. This entire dealership empire is effectively bankrupt as of 10 minutes ago. Jasmine let out a sharp, hysterical sob. She gripped the edge of the walnut table, her pristine white business suit suddenly looking entirely inadequate for the catastrophe unfolding around her. "Dad, tell them she is making this up," Jasmine pleaded, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. "Tell them we still have the money. I cannot lose my trust fund. I just put an offer on a house in the Hamptons. My credit cards cannot be frozen." Richard ignored his daughter completely. He turned his venomous glare toward Bradley, who was currently cowering near the window, cradling his splinted hand against his chest. Bradley, you pathetic idiot! Richard hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of betrayal and raw panic. You skimmed from the pension funds. I specifically told you to leave domestic payroll accounts untouched. You brought direct federal scrutiny right to our front door for some volatile digital currency. You ruined everything I built. Bradley backed away, his arrogant facade completely shattered. He looked like a terrified child caught stealing. I had to pay off my own debts, Bradley stammered, his eyes darting frantically around the hostile room. You cut my executive bonuses last year. I needed capital to maintain my lifestyle. I thought the automated script was completely untraceable. I thought the dealership revenue would cover the gaps before anyone noticed the missing retirement funds. You thought you were smarter than a forensic accountant? I corrected him coldly. You stole exactly $12.5 million from the people who scrub your floors, sell your vehicles, and balance your books. You funneled their futures into anonymous digital wallets, and you left a digital footprint so massive a first-year auditor could have found it. The federal agents have your exact login credentials, your transaction hashes, and the timestamp data from your private office terminal. You are looking at 20 years in a federal penitentiary for the pension fraud alone. The female investor wearing sharp glasses slammed her briefcase shut. She stood up, her expression a mask of ruthless self-preservation. We are divesting immediately, she announced to the room. We need to contact our legal teams right now and establish that we had absolutely zero knowledge of this criminal enterprise. We are victims of this fraud. If we do not get ahead of this federal investigation, the authorities will freeze our portfolios too. The other shareholders instantly erupted into a frenzy of panicked action. They scrambled out of their leather chairs, grabbing their coats and phones. They shoved past each other, rushing toward the boardroom doors in a desperate attempt to escape the sinking ship. The pristine, orderly world of the corporate elite descended into absolute chaos. They did not care about Richard or Bradley anymore. They only cared about saving their own wealth from the impending federal strike. Richard watched his investors abandon him. The empire he had built on violence, intimidation, and deceit was crumbling into dust right before his eyes. He looked at the projection screen, staring at the government referral form bearing his name and his crimes. The reality of his absolute destruction finally registered in his dark, calculating eyes. Suddenly, a high-pitched, piercing wail cut through the heavy glass windows of the penthouse boardroom. The distinct, terrifying sound of police sirens echoed loudly from the city streets below. The wailing multiplied rapidly, indicating a massive, coordinated convoy of law enforcement vehicles converging directly on the corporate plaza. They had arrived. Richard's head snapped toward the windows, his face contorted with pure animalistic panic. He abandoned his son, ignored his weeping daughter, and bolted toward the private executive elevator, their dark gear striking a terrifying contrast against the opulent mahogany walls. The bold yellow letters, spelling out the Federal Bureau of Investigation across their vests, signaled the absolute end of the luxury car empire. Nobody move, the lead agent roared, his voice cutting through the panic with unquestionable authority. Hands in the air right now. The fleeing investors froze, dropping leather briefcases and raising trembling hands above their heads. They understood instantly that running from a federal raid would guarantee them an obstruction charge. The trained agents poured into their rooms, securing the perimeter and blocking every possible exit. The pristine world of corporate dominance had transformed into a crime scene in seconds. Richard realized the main exit was compromised. He spun away from the elevator bank, eyes darting frantically around the luxury suite, searching for any alternative escape route. He bolted toward the service doors leading to the internal stairwell, knocking over a bronze sculpture in blind panic. He did not make it more than 5 steps. 2 federal agents intercepted his path, moving with ruthless precision. One agent grabbed Richard by the collar of his bespoke suit jacket, twisting the fabric tightly to cut off his airway. The second agent quickly swept Richard's legs out from under him. The powerful billionaire, a man who had spent decades terrifying everyone around him, hit the hardwood floor with a sickening thud. The impact knocked the wind out of his lungs, leaving him gasping for air like a landed fish. Bradley watched his father collapse, face contorted with abject terror. He pressed his back flat against the floor-to-ceiling windows, trying to merge with the glass to escape the federal onslaught. He cradled his splinted hand against his chest, tears of cowardice streaming down his pale cheeks. "Do not shoot," Bradley screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched wail as two agents advanced on his position. "I am a victim here. I was forced to do it. My father made me steal the money. I will testify against him. I will tell you everything you want to know." The agents did not pause to listen to his pathetic bargaining. They grabbed him by the shoulders and yanked him away from the glass. I stood perfectly still at the head of the walnut table, maintaining my ground amidst the overwhelming chaos. I kept my hands clearly visible, resting them flat against the smooth wood of the conference table. A female agent approached my position, her eyes assessing my calm demeanor and the offline laptop projecting the damning forensic ledgers onto the screen. "Are you the forensic auditor who transmitted the information referral packet?" The agent asked, her voice sharp and professional. "Yes," I replied, my voice steady and clear. "The encrypted flash drives containing the raw offshore routing data and the domestic embezzlement logs are sitting right here. I have also initiated a secure transfer of the digital keys directly to the lead investigator of your financial crimes division." The agent nodded, gesturing to a secondary team of technicians who moved in to secure my hardware. The boardroom was a symphony of destruction and justice. The wealthy shareholders, who had arrogantly dismissed me minutes ago, were now being systematically detained and questioned. The silver-haired investor was sweating profusely, arguing frantically with an agent about his lack of involvement. The woman with sharp glasses was dialing her defense attorney, her hands shaking so violently she dropped her phone twice. They were finally experiencing the exact same helplessness and terror they had allowed Richard to inflict on innocent people for decades. Their wealth could not buy them out of a federal tax evasion conspiracy of this magnitude. The authorities were locking down the building, seizing servers, filing cabinets, and communication devices. Every single dirty secret this family had buried was being dragged out into the harsh light of a federal investigation. Jasmine stood paralyzed near the center of the room. Her pristine white business suit was now wrinkled, her perfectly styled hair falling in messy strands across her face. She looked at the armed agents, then at her father writhing on the floor, and finally at me. Her arrogant superiority had vanished, replaced by the crushing realization that she was no longer a protected princess. Her trust fund was gone, her offshore accounts were frozen. The lavish lifestyle she used to mock and belittle everyone around her had been funded by stolen pensions and laundered cash. She was absolutely nothing. She sank slowly to her knees, burying her face in her hands, letting out a loud, uncontrollable sob that went ignored by the busy federal agents moving around her. The lead agent marched toward the center of the room, holding a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. He looked down at Richard, who was struggling desperately to push himself up from the hardwood floor. "You are under arrest for massive federal tax fraud, money laundering, and corporate embezzlement." The agent announced, his voice carrying the full, crushing weight of the United States government. He grabbed Richard's arms, wrenching them forcefully behind his back. The loud, metallic click of the handcuffs locking into place echoed sharply through the ruined boardroom. A second pair of agents dragged a weeping, hysterical Bradley across the room, forcing him to his knees beside his father. The agents pushed them both forward simultaneously. Richard and Bradley were slammed aggressively against the polished mahogany table, their faces pressed flat against the dark wood, securely handcuffed and completely stripped of their power. The heavy steel handcuffs locked around Bradley's wrists with a sharp mechanical snap that echoed above the shouting investors. He thrashed weakly against the solid mahogany table, his pristine tuxedo jacket bunching up around his shoulders as a federal agent pressed a firm hand between his shoulder blades. Richard lay immobilized just a few feet away, his chest heaving as he gasped for air, his face turning a mottled shade of purple against the polished wood. The untouchable patriarch of the luxury auto empire was finally tasting the absolute terror he had inflicted on his wife and his employees for decades. Bradley twisted his neck, scraping his cheek against the table to look directly at me. His arrogant sneer was completely gone, replaced by the frantic, wide-eyed panic of a cornered animal. "Stella, you have to stop this right now," Bradley begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "Tell them you overreacted because we had a fight. I am your husband. We just took our vows hours ago. You promised to love and protect me. You cannot let them take me to federal prison. I stood perfectly still at the head of the boardroom table, watching the federal agents methodically secure the room. You lost the right to invoke my protection the exact second you slapped me across the face and threatened to murder your own mother, I replied, my voice projecting a cold, unwavering authority over the chaotic room. You chose violence and greed. Now you get to experience the federal consequences of those choices. The lead agent hauled Bradley up from the table, gripping him firmly by his bicep. Bradley stumbled, his knees trembling so violently he could barely support his own weight. He looked at the armed agents swarming his corporate headquarters, pulling hard drives from the walls and boxing up the financial ledgers. Desperation kicked his manipulative instincts into overdrive. He suddenly let out a loud, forced laugh, shaking his head, as if he had just discovered a brilliant loophole. "You are wasting your time!" Stella Bradley shouted, a sudden wave of manic confidence washing over his tear-stained face. "You think you have me trapped, but you are completely forgetting the law. We are legally married. We signed the marriage license this afternoon. It is fully filed with the state registry. You are my legal wife, which means you cannot testify against me in a federal court. I invoke spousal privilege. You have 0 other witnesses to verify those offshore routing numbers or the pension fund login credentials. Without your direct testimony, the prosecution has no star witness. Their entire tax evasion case will fall apart before it even reaches a grand jury." The remaining investors paused, whispering frantically among themselves. Spousal privilege is a foundational pillar of the American legal system. A spouse cannot be compelled to take the witness stand and disclose confidential communications made during a valid marriage. Bradley thought his 11th-hour wedding had provided him with an impenetrable legal shield. He believed the marriage certificate was his ultimate out-of-jail-free card. I slowly walked around the long mahogany table, my dark running shoes making no sound against the floor. I stopped directly in front of my handcuffed husband. I looked at his desperate, sweating face, marveling at how easily he transitioned from violent abuser to legal scholar when his own freedom was on the line. I tilted my head, studying him with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a deeply flawed experiment. "You really think spousal privilege is going to save you from a massive federal indictment, Bradley?" I asked, keeping my tone dangerously even. "You think a judge is going to throw out a $142 million embezzlement case because we shared a slice of wedding cake and a dance?" "It is the law," Bradley spat back, pulling against the agent grip. "You cannot be forced to testify against your husband. The federal prosecutors know that. You played a good game with your little hacking stunt, Stella, but you lost. My father and I will walk away from this." I let out a soft, humorless laugh. It was a cold sound that made the federal agent holding Bradley shift his stance. "You are absolutely right about the American legal system, Bradley." I conceded, taking another deliberate step closer. Spousal privilege is incredibly robust. The courts heavily protect marital communications, but there is a very specific catastrophic exception to that privilege, an exception you clearly never learned about during your expensive private education. Bradley frowned, his manic confidence faltering for a fraction of a second. "What exception?" "Spousal privilege is immediately and permanently invalidated if the marriage itself was entered into for the sole purpose of perpetuating or concealing a criminal fraud," I explained, enunciating every single syllable with lethal precision. "But more importantly, the privilege is completely void if the marriage was a legally sanctioned undercover operation." The boardroom went dead silent. The frantic typing of the evidence technicians halted. Richard, who was currently being hauled to his feet by 2 agents, stopped struggling. He stared at me with wide, bloodshot eyes, his brilliant criminal mind finally catching up to the terrifying reality of his situation. Bradley's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He stared at me as if I had just grown a second head. "Undercover operation," he whispered, the words barely escaping his throat. "What are you talking about? You are just a basic corporate accountant. We met at a charity gala. I hired you to manage the dealership tax filings." I leaned in close, bringing my face mere inches from his sweating, terrified features. I lowered my voice so only he, his father, and the arresting agents could hear the final crushing truth. "You did not hire a basic accountant from a charity gala, Bradley. You hired a senior forensic auditor for the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division." Bradley stared at me with wide, unblinking eyes, as the absolute reality of my words fractured his entire worldview. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a hollow shell of the arrogant billionaire I had pretended to love. His jaw trembled as he struggled to process the devastating magnitude of his own gullibility. He slowly shook his head side to side, silently denying the truth standing right in front of him. "You are lying," Bradley gasped, his voice barely a terrified whisper. "We dated for 2 years. We planned a wedding. You met my family. You told me you grew up poor and just wanted a safe life. I created a psychological profile specifically tailored to target your massive narcissistic ego," I explained, maintaining my cold professional distance. "The federal government spent 3 years trying to penetrate your father's offshore banking network. His digital firewalls were impenetrable from the outside, and his internal security was too lethal for traditional informants. We knew we needed direct access to the internal ledgers located on your private servers. When my department profiled your behavior, we realized you had a profound weakness for vulnerable women you could easily control and dominate." I took a slow, deliberate step backward, forcing him to look up at me from his pathetic position on the hardwood floor. "The agency established my fake identity. We placed me at that specific charity gala because we knew you were attending to launder your public image. I played the naive, struggling accountant desperately searching for a wealthy savior. You took the bait flawlessly, Bradley. You thought you were manipulating a helpless girl to act as a blind signatory for your messy corporate tax filings. You brought a federal auditor directly into the heart of your criminal empire and handed me the keys to your entire kingdom." Richard let out a guttural sound of pure agony from the floor where 2 armed agents held him pinned. He thrashed violently against the solid wood, his handcuffs digging deep into his wrists. "You treacherous parasite," Richard screamed, his face contorted with unchecked fury. "I knew you were too calculating. I told this idiot son of mine to never trust an outsider with the company books." I shifted my gaze down to the disgraced patriarch. "You should have trusted your instincts, Richard," I stated flatly. "But your son was too busy using my fake credentials to cover his tracks. Do you want to know the best part about that ironclad prenuptial agreement you forced me to sign before the wedding? You thought your high-priced corporate lawyers were protecting your precious family assets from a gold digger. My federal task force actually drafted the foundational clauses of that specific contract. We engineered the legal language to ensure I maintained absolute personal immunity from the astronomical federal tax debts you were secretly accruing. The contract completely severed my liability from your illegal operations while simultaneously granting me unrestricted access to the corporate holding company. You literally forced me to sign a document that protected me from the inevitable federal asset seizure." Bradley let out a pathetic whimpering sound, burying his face against the floor. He finally understood that his entire life was a carefully orchestrated federal sting operation. "You ruined my life, Stella," he sobbed uncontrollably, his splinted hand awkwardly pressed against his side. "I actually loved you." "You do not know how to love anyone, Bradley," I replied, my voice echoing with absolute finality. "You only know how to control and abuse. If you had not assaulted your own mother last night, my operation would have continued quietly for another 3 months. I was supposed to gather the remaining offshore routing codes and execute the raid quietly later this year. But when you chose to resort to domestic violence, you forced my hand. I accelerated the timeline to protect Beatrice. Your own violent arrogance brought this federal strike force to your doorstep today." The lead federal agent stepped forward, retrieving a heavy tactical jacket from a tactical bag. The bold yellow letters on the back clearly identified our federal agency. The agent respectfully handed the jacket to me. I slipped it over my dark sweater, feeling the familiar weight of my true identity settling back onto my shoulders. I was no longer the submissive wife. I was the architect of their total destruction. Jasmine watched this transformation from the corner of the boardroom, her eyes wide with absolute horror. She slowly backed away from the federal agents, her hands trembling violently as she pulled her expensive smartphone from her designer purse. She tapped the screen frantically, desperately trying to access her private banking applications to secure whatever funds she could salvage. She needed to book a private flight to a non-extradition country before the agents realized she was also complicit in the tax fraud. A loud electronic beep echoed from her phone, followed immediately by a harsh red notification flashing across her screen. Jasmine gasped, tapping the application again and again. Her breath hitched in her throat as a second and third notification alerted her that her premium credit accounts were entirely frozen. She tried her emergency offshore accounts, but the application simply crashed, displaying terminal error codes. "No, no, no, this cannot be happening!" Jasmine cried out, her voice shrill with mounting panic. "My money is completely gone. Every single card is declining." The heavy boardroom doors swung open one final time. Donovan walked into the chaotic executive suite, completely ignoring the armed federal agents securing the perimeter. He looked commanding and resolute, wearing his sharp charcoal suit. He walked directly toward his weeping, terrified wife, holding a thick stack of legal documents. He stared down at her ruined, arrogant face, finally handing her the freshly signed and fully executed official legal divorce papers. Jasmine stared blankly at the thick stack of legal documents resting in her trembling hands. The crisp, white pages detailed Donovan claiming full primary custody of their young son and outlining her complete financial ruin. "You cannot do this to me, Donovan," she sobbed, her voice cracking as she clawed desperately at his tailored charcoal suit. "I am your wife. You are supposed to protect me from these people." Donovan gently but firmly removed her manicured hands from his jacket. He looked down at her with an expression of profound pity mixed with absolute closure. "You stopped being my wife the moment you cheered while your father beat your mother almost to death," Donovan stated, his deep voice resonating with quiet authority. "You chose the money, and you chose the cruelty. Now you get to experience the consequences of living without either." He turned his back on her weeping form and walked out of the ruined executive boardroom without a single backward glance. Jasmine collapsed completely onto the expensive hardwood floor, letting out a guttural wail of pure agony. The federal agents ignored her theatrics, stepping methodically around her to continue boxing up the remaining corporate hard drives. 2 days later, the reality of the federal justice system crushed whatever lingering delusions of grandeur Richard and Bradley still harbored. The federal courthouse in downtown Manhattan was swarming with national media syndicates covering the spectacular downfall of the luxury automotive kingpin. I sat quietly in the back row of the crowded courtroom, watching the arraignment unfold. Richard and Bradley were marched into the stark room wearing matching orange institutional jumpsuits, their wrists and ankles bound by heavy steel transport chains. The brilliant tailored suits and arrogant smirks were entirely gone. They looked like exactly what they were, which was common criminals stripped of their ill-gotten wealth. The high-powered defense attorneys Richard had managed to retain on retainer argued aggressively for their pre-trial release. They claimed Richard was a pillar of the community and a major philanthropic donor who posed zero flight risk. The federal prosecutor, a ruthless woman who had spent weeks reviewing my forensic ledgers, stood up and dismantled their defense in less than 3 minutes. She presented the judge with the exact flight itineraries Jasmine had attempted to book during the boardroom raid. She displayed the offshore wire transfer authorizations, proving Richard had unlimited access to untraceable liquid capital in non-extradition countries. Finally, she presented the photographic evidence of the severe physical abuse Beatrice had suffered, detailing the extreme danger Richard posed to witnesses. The federal judge slammed his heavy wooden gavel down onto the sounding block. He stared down at the two disgraced men with absolute contempt. Given the astronomical magnitude of the financial fraud, the blatant theft of employee pension funds, and the demonstrated history of violent witness intimidation, "I am denying bail for both defendants," the judge announced, his voice booming through the silent courtroom. "Both men are remanded immediately to federal custody pending trial." Richard's face turned a sickly shade of purple as the reality of his confinement settled in. He lunged against his heavy chains, screaming profanities at the judge before two armed marshals forced him back into his seat. Bradley simply dropped his head onto the defense table, openly weeping in front of the packed gallery. The subsequent weeks moved with terrifying speed as the federal government systematically dismantled the corrupt dealership empire. The Internal Revenue Service executed massive asset forfeiture warrants across the entire eastern seaboard. Federal agents seized the sprawling marital mansion, locking the iron gates and placing neon seizure notices across the front doors. They impounded fleets of luxury vehicles, froze domestic banking accounts, and legally seized the Cayman Island holdings, using the unencrypted keys I had provided. The media coverage was absolutely relentless, broadcasting the staggering depth of the pension fund theft to the entire nation. Facing a mountain of undeniable forensic evidence and the total vaporization of their financial resources, the high-priced defense attorneys advised their clients to accept a plea agreement. A lengthy trial would only guarantee the maximum possible sentences. The sentencing phase brought a profound sense of closure to the employees who had their futures stolen. Bradley accepted a plea deal resulting in 22 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary for the pension embezzlement and wire fraud. Richard, facing an avalanche of tax evasion, money laundering, and assault charges, received a staggering 35-year sentence. He would spend the absolute rest of his natural life rotting inside a concrete cell, completely stripped of the power he had used to terrorize his family, with the criminal elements of the family permanently locked away. A different kind of justice began taking root in the aftermath. The federal authorities successfully recovered a significant portion of the stolen retirement funds, ensuring the employees would not lose their life savings. But the most beautiful transformation occurred within the remnants of the fractured family structure. The government asset seizure targeted the illegal offshore holdings and the specific corporate entities involved in the money laundering network. However, there were several legitimate clean assets and isolated real estate holdings that Richard had placed securely in his wife's name decades ago to avoid early tax liabilities. Beatrice walked out of the Domestic Violence Recovery Center, a completely transformed woman. The dark bruises on her face had faded, leaving behind a radiant, resilient strength that had been suppressed for over 30 years. Armed with an elite legal team funded by the clean assets, she officially took absolute control of the remaining legitimate properties across the entire state. She stepped out of the dark, suffocating shadow of her abusers and proudly claimed her rightful independence. She was no longer a terrified victim cowering in a massive, sprawling mansion. Beatrice was now the very proud and sole matriarch of her own amazing destiny, fully prepared to rebuild a life defined by lasting peace and authentic security. Beatrice reclaiming her life was only the first chapter of our ultimate triumph. While she restructured legitimate properties into a powerful enterprise, I finalized my exit from the undercover operation. Handing the government a $142 million tax evasion case guarantees they expedite the paperwork. I walked into the federal building in Manhattan for my final debriefing as an active field auditor. My director slid a thick folder across his metal desk. He rarely smiled, but today he looked incredibly satisfied. The agency had officially seized every offshore asset hidden in the Caymans. They liquidated Richard illicit holdings and recovered the stolen pension funds completely. My forensic accounting led directly to the massive federal recovery, entitling me to the whistleblower reward. Federal law guarantees an informant between 15 and 30% of the recovered capital. My director handed me a heavy silver pen. I signed my name at the bottom of the Treasury authorization form. The final payout calculated at exactly $39 million. The money wired directly into my private accounts, transforming me into a highly independent multimillionaire. I shook my director hand, surrendered my badge, and walked out a completely free woman. I spent 3 grueling years playing the naive, submissive wife to a violent corporate criminal. I endured Bradley's psychological abuse and Richard's terrifying intimidation to gather digital evidence. Now the mission was officially over and I had won everything. 6 months later, harsh winter winds faded into a warm coastal spring. I drove my new vehicle along the scenic highway toward a secluded beach in the Hamptons. Pristine white sand stretched endlessly alongside crashing blue waves of the Atlantic Ocean. I parked my car near a boardwalk and walked down toward the water. 2 familiar figures waited near the shoreline. Donovan stood tall and relaxed, wearing a gray linen shirt and khaki shorts. The burden of his toxic marriage to Jasmine had completely washed away. He looked younger, healthier, and profoundly at peace. Beside him stood Beatrice, looking absolutely radiant in a flowing white sundress. Her silver hair caught the ocean breeze and her eyes sparkled with genuine joy. She looked nothing like the terrified, battered woman I dragged out of that bridal suite. She was glowing with authentic freedom. I walked across the warm sand and wrapped my arms around Beatrice in a tight embrace. We held each other tightly, silently, acknowledging the brutal nightmare we survived together. Donovan stepped forward and gave me a strong, warm hug. "It is incredibly good to see you," Stella. Donovan said, his deep voice carrying a light, joyful tone. We walked slowly along the waterline, letting cool ocean water wash over our bare feet. I asked Donovan about his new life. He smiled broadly, telling me his divorce from Jasmine was completely finalized. Due to her complicity in federal tax fraud and lack of financial resources, Donovan was awarded full custody of their son. Jasmine was currently living in a cramped studio apartment working a minimum wage retail job to pay off mounting legal debts. Donovan had taken his savings and opened his own highly successful private investigation firm. He was finally his own boss, answering to nobody but his own strong moral compass. Beatrice linked her arm through mine as we walked. She told me about the total restructuring of the dealership empire. She fired every corrupt executive loyal to Richard and replaced them with honest, hardworking professionals. She personally oversaw the full restoration of the employee retirement accounts, adding a generous matching contribution from her clean assets to compensate for the emotional stress they endured. The business was thriving under her ethical leadership, and she was using a massive portion of profits to fund domestic violence shelters across the eastern seaboard. She was actively using her painful past to protect and empower vulnerable women who needed an escape route. We stopped walking and stood facing the vast, endless horizon of the Atlantic Ocean. The crashing waves created a rhythmic, soothing melody that felt like a baptism. I reached deep into the pocket of my light denim jacket. My fingers brushed against a small, hard object. I pulled out the heavy diamond wedding ring Bradley had forcefully shoved onto my finger during our fake, extravagant ceremony. The massive diamond caught the bright sunlight, sparkling with cold, artificial brilliance. It was a physical symbol of his control, his violence, and his arrogant delusion. Beatrice looked at the ring resting in the palm of my hand. She gave me a soft, knowing nod of approval. Donovan stood silently beside her, a respectful guardian watching me reclaim my absolute autonomy. I did not hesitate for a single second. I pulled my arm back and threw the heavy diamond ring as far as I possibly could into the crashing ocean waves. The ring sailed through the salty air, catching one last gleam of sunlight before plunging deep into the dark, churning water, forever lost to the bottom of the sea. A profound, overwhelming sense of liberation rushed through my entire body. I turned my back on the ocean and looked at the two beautiful, brave people standing beside me. We had walked through absolute hell, and we had burned the devil alive in his own corporate boardroom. We had stripped the powerful abusers of their wealth, their freedom, and their dignity. I smiled at Beatrice and Donovan, feeling the warm coastal sun on my face. I was 31 years old, holding $39 million in clean, untraceable capital. I had no toxic family dragging me down, no violent husband monitoring my every move, and no undercover mission requiring me to pretend to be someone else. For the very first time in my entire life, the future belonged entirely and exclusively to me. I walked away from the shoreline, leaving the dark shadows of the past buried in the sand, stepping forward into a bright, victorious, and utterly limitless new beginning. The overarching lesson derived from these experiences is that true empowerment, security, and healing require deliberately severing ties with toxic family environments and cultivating independent resilience. The provided narratives consistently demonstrate that biological connections, legal adoptions, or marital bonds do not inherently guarantee loyalty, protection, or love. Individuals frequently endure profound betrayal from the very people expected to offer unconditional support. This betrayal manifests in various forms, such as a mother abandoning her teenage daughter at an airport for a vacation, parents financing a $230,000 wedding, while refusing to fund a dying grandson's $85,000 medical treatment, or a family publicly humiliating and disowning a daughter for failing to meet rigid academic expectations. These destructive actions reveal that toxic familial structures operate on manipulation, conditional approval, and the systematic exploitation of vulnerabilities. The critical breakthrough for victims occurs when they accept that they cannot heal by seeking validation from their abusers. Lasting personal security is achieved strictly through absolute self-reliance and the establishment of firm boundaries. Financial independence. Meticulous documentation of abuses and strategic legal preparation serve as essential safety nets against continued manipulation. Recognizing that independence is the greatest form of security empowers individuals to dismantle their abusers' control and reclaim absolute autonomy over their own lives. Escaping these toxic hierarchies requires acknowledging that toxic individuals will not change unless they lose their power. Furthermore, surviving profound family betrayal necessitates fundamentally redefining the concept of family. True family is not dictated by shared DNA inheritance or legal documentation. Rather, it is defined by the consistent active choice to show up, protect, and genuinely value one another. When a biological family fails to provide this foundation, individuals possess the power to forge their own chosen families, rooted entirely in mutual respect, authentic support, and shared values. The ultimate triumph over abuse is not achieved through destructive vengeance, but through securing personal freedom and success on one's own terms. Building a meaningful life and becoming everything the abusers claimed was impossible serves as the definitive manifestation of justice. Have you ever had to establish firm boundaries to protect your well-being from toxic relatives, and what specific steps did you take to reclaim your independence? Share your story and comment below.